So here are 5 attitudes that I believe that we need to cultivate. The first of these is, I am a human being expressing God without reservation. This is an attitude that says, who I am is particular, is individual, but I am expressing God. And therefore, I am honorable, I am worthy, I count, and I shouldn't be thinking of myself as something that is less than valuable. That's the first. The second is, I accept myself without complaint. I have a slogan that I use in my own life. It says, whenever I hear my children complaining or other people and they ask me for advice, I always say, don't complain, don't explain. Don't complain, don't explain. I accept myself without complaint. I look at the body that I'm in, and I understand that this is nothing more than my curriculum to God. There are things about it that if I were to be designing it myself, perhaps I would have done a little differently. I might have put a little extra hair on the top. I might have made myself a little taller. I might have made myself a little darker. I might have made my eyes a different color, whatever it is. But that isn't up to me. Because who I am is not this thing that I occupy. This is just a garage where I park my soul. And it doesn't matter. It is my curriculum to God. And whether it can see or can't see, whether it's in a wheelchair, whether it's 4'1" or 7'3", whether it's dark or white, whether it's living on the plains of the Kalahari, or whether it's living in New Guinea, or in Detroit, or Chicago, it doesn't make any difference. I accept myself without complaint. This is what I showed up in. And not only do I accept myself without complaint, but I accept life without complaining. And all of us have that choice, and we don't listen to that inner voice. That inner voice. I've often said that if prayer is you talking to God, then your intuition is God talking to you. And that intuition is something you want to listen to. And complaining about anything in your world, particularly about yourself, is a way of blocking the free flow of the divine intelligence that is everywhere and wants to be delivering abundance into your life. The third is, and this is a hard one for people, is I take full responsibility for my life. I take full responsibility for my life. You see, if you are disconnected or feel disconnected from the divine source, you cannot manifest. The separation is what keeps you from connecting. You can't align yourself. Not taking responsibility for your life and anything in it. And I get letters from people who feel that I shouldn't be saying this because people who have illnesses that they can't do anything about, they don't want to have to take responsibility for them. Or people who have been victims of abuse and things like this don't want to take responsibility for them. Taking responsibility doesn't mean that you feel guilty about anything that has come your way. It means that I have attracted this into my life in some way that I don't understand. It has showed up in my life. And it's my life. And I want to be able to ensure that these things don't show up anymore. And also I want to be able to send them out of my life. But I can't do it if I don't assume a kind of responsibility for them. No guilt. And the fourth one is, I take on no guilt. If to feel worthy, you don't take on guilt. Just taking on this sense of responsibility. If I get anything in my body, that if it's a hernia, if it's an ache, if it's a pain, if it were a cancer, if it were arthritis, if it's I can't sleep, if it's a cold, if it's a backache, if it's a headache, whatever it is, I am going to say, there's something in me that has attracted this. Rather than, I don't know how this happened, I'm just a victim. These kind of things happen. We live in a carcinogenic world, and these kind of things just happen. It's like the minute that you take responsibility for it, you connect to the divine source, which can heal it. The minute that you say, I had nothing to do with this, then you put that barrier up there and you're disconnected from the healing of it. So I'm not talking, I want to re-emphasize, I'm not talking about feeling guilty about it. I'm talking about saying, it's here, I've experienced it, I can do something with it. I can either go back to that stage of being an athlete and being a warrior and say, it's all in my ego, or I can do something profound about it, which is to say I can teach and become a statesman and a spiritual being by teaching others how to avoid having this happen. It came to me for a reason. I don't have to understand it, but I take responsibility for it. No guilt, no abdicating the person who was responsible for it and saying, oh, it wasn't their fault. None of that. No removal of the punishment that the person deserves for that kind of conduct. None of that. Simply taking responsibility and saying, I now connect to whatever it is that's in my life, and I no longer am going to carry around the anguish and the guilt there, any place in my life. As soon as you do that, you honor your worthiness to receive the healing, to receive the abundance, to receive the love that might have been missing from your life. The fifth and final affirmation or attitude to create for ourselves a sense of being worthy is to have congruency in your life. Congruency. I understand the importance of harmony between my thoughts, my feelings, and my behaviors. Very often, most of the problems that we face as people come from our inability to have congruency or harmony exist between what I think, what I feel, and how I behave. I may think one thing, I may feel something else, and then behave in a different way. And to have a congruency is to honor your worthiness. Virtually all addictions come from an incongruency. I have a thought about one thing, I feel something else, and then I behave in a different way. And that incongruency is what keeps us from feeling worthy.
In reading the aphorisms of Patanjali, he was talking, now you have to remember we're talking about before the Middle Ages, which were called the Dark Ages. And here was Patanjali writing about the ability to be able to do absolutely miraculous things. The ability to be able to be in more than one place at the same time. The ability to be able to be in the presence of another human being and raise your energy to such a level that you could literally, by your presence alone, just heal that person. The ability to be able to transcend things like diseases. The ability to be able to have the gift of fish and loaves. To just live at such a level of consciousness that anything you placed your attention on instantaneously, you had the capacity and the power to be able to make that realization for you. The book is called How to Know God. Now, it's not called How to Know About God. It's not called How to Believe in God. It's called How to Know God. And How to Know God means making conscious contact with God. It's the only way you can know anything. So here are the 5 aphorisms. The first is called, the central act of ignorance is false identification. The central act of ignorance is called false identification. What does Patanjali mean by false identification? And what does he mean by ignorance? Ignorance is not to be assumed to mean that you are uninformed. It means that you are identifying yourself as a human being with your body and your possessions and this material world. And the central act of that ignorance is the identification falsely with this world of the changing. But beyond the world of the changing is the changeless world. And once you start to identify yourself there and know that this is who you are, know it, like you're listening right now and you're watching, and the energy that is coming into you is coming through your eyes and ears and senses. And it is only your eyes and your ears and your senses that take this energy and twist it into something called evil or problems. it comes into your eyes, these energies, and into your ears, if it could be examined just before it hits your eyes, and just before it reaches your ears, and we could examine it very carefully, you would find that the scientists would say, no, there's no problems in that energy. There's no evil in that energy. Nope, it's just energy. It's just a frequency. It's vibrating at a certain speed. But as soon as it hits your senses and you begin to interpret it, problems begin to show up in your life. But the energy itself contains no problems. It's just energy. That's proper identification according to Patanjali. That's the first aphorism. The second aphorism sounds like this. The mind of the truly illumined, said Patanjali, is calm, because the peace of God within all things is known, even within the appearance of misery and disease. Even within the appearance of misery and disease. The mind of the truly illumined is always calm. And the mind of the truly illumined understands that the peace of God is in all things. You are in this world, but what? You are not of this world. That is not who you are. You are not of this world, even though you're in it. So you're filling out the forms, you send in your money to the IRS, and you stop at the red lights, and you obey the laws, and you follow the rules, that is, most of them, which seem to make sense, and the ones that don't, you're able to ignore, which you have to, otherwise we'll never have any growth. The third aphorism is quite simple, and it's one that's most troubling to many people in the West. Patanjali said, sin is non-existent. Sin is non-existent. There are only obstacles to one's ultimate union with God. You do not sin when you behave toward another person in a harmful way, when you steal from another person, when you violate any of the commandments or whatever. You have not sinned. You have created an obstacle to your union with God. You see, the reason we don't want to put sin in there, according to Patanjali, is because it creates shame and guilt. Shame computes the absolute lowest in whether you're going to be strong or weak in your life. Shame is the lowest frequency emotion that is possible. It only computes at 25 on a scale of 1 to 1,000. The fourth aphorism that leads us into a spiritual solution to every problem sounds like this. And these last two are the ones that I absolutely resonate to and love the most. The person who is steadfast in his abstention from falsehood has the power to obtain for himself and others the fruits of good deeds without having to perform the deeds themselves. Steadfast in abstaining from means that you never waver and you never have thoughts of falsehood, that is, identifying yourself as a material being rather than a spiritual being. And when you become steadfast in that, when you say to someone, God blesses you, they are blessed by your presence when you have that kind of consciousness. And you present yourself to someone and you are absolutely steadfast in abstention from falsehood. And in the presence of such a person, healing takes place. And blessing takes place. And the fifth aphorism, my favorite of all, says, when a person is steadfast in his abstention from harming others, then all living creatures will cease to feel enmity in his or her presence. So when you become steadfast in your abstention from ever having a thought of harm directing at other people, and that's how you walk through the world, butterflies will land on your shoulder. Birds will not be afraid of you. Little dogs, or even vicious dogs, will become domesticated by being in your presence. All living creatures, babies, will goo-goo and come to you. You know people like this, don't you? And what you'll do is set into motion these dormant forces, which will collaborate with you because you're in spirit rather than in form.